Flight and technical characteristics of the Pe-2 bomber.
Engines. M105 Power. 1,100 horsepower. Wingspan, 57.81 feet. Length of aircraft, 41.53 feet. Height of aircraft, 13.12 feet. Wing area, 435.94 square feet. Weight. Empty aircraft, 5,325 tons. Normal takeoff weight, 6,967 tons. Maximum speed, 335.56 miles per hour. Practical ceiling, 28,864 feet. Range, 932 miles.
History of the aircraft. The Pe-2 was a twin-engine dive bomber designed under the leadership of V.M. Petlyarkov in the Special Technical Department of the NKVD. Initially, the plane under the designation 100 was conceived as a heavy fighter with hermetic cabin. Design works were conducted since 1938. The prototype took off for the first time on December 22, 1939. The results of state tests were generally positive, but as there was no danger of massive enemy use of high-altitude bombers, the fighter was admittedly inadvisable. Instead, in May 1940, it was proposed to create a dive bomber based on the 100. The aircraft, which received the designation PB-100, inherited from its predecessor the general all-metal monoplane aerodynamic scheme with twin wingtips, the power plant of two 12-cylinder liquid-cooled M105 engines, but was deprived of turbochargers and a pressurized cabin unnecessary for a dive bomber. Abandoning the turbochargers allowed the reduction of the nacelle midsection, which, combined with the use of jet exhaust pipes, made it possible to increase the speed somewhat. The area of water and oil radiators was considerably increased in order to improve thermal regime of the engines. Pilot and navigator were placed in the common cockpit. To ensure combat use in a new capacity, the aircraft was equipped with dive turrets and brake grills. Building of pre-production batch of planes which in December 1940 received designation Pe-2 was conducted by the plant number 39. The first plane was flown in December 15, 1940, and in January 1941 the first planes were delivered at plant number 22, assigned as the main manufacturer of the Pe-2. TS production continued until 1945 with a total output of 11,427 aircraft. In particular, plant number 22 in Moscow, and later in evacuation to Kazan, in 1941 to 1945 produced 10,058 aircraft, plant number 39, in Moscow, and after the evacuation to Irkutsk, in 1940 to 1943 produced 896 machines, plants number 124 and number 125, respectively. Kazan and Irkutsk, in 1941 produced 104 and 144 aircraft. Combat use of the aircraft. The first production Pe-2s were delivered to the 95th Bomber Aviation Regiment of the Moscow Military District and the 48th Bomber Field of the Kiev District. By the time World War II began, only these two regiments managed to be fully staffed with new dive bombers. By June 22, 1941, altogether in the border districts had 180 P-2s. Air forces had in service a total of 391 such aircraft. Naval aviation of the Baltic and the Black Sea each received 5 P-2s. By the beginning of the war, Pe-2 did not have time to pass any operational or military tests, and the level of familiarity of the personnel with the machine was extremely low. The dive bombing technique was practically not practiced. In the first days of the war, the best prepared 48th Regiment was striking at the enemy troops in the districts of Dubno, Rivne and Brody, trying to hold back the advance of German tank divisions. From June 22 to July 17, the regiment lost all of its aircraft and was taken off to reform. In all, over the first 22 days of combat operations, the air forces of the Southwestern Front lost 70 of the 92 Pe-2s involved in combat operations. The situation on the Western Front was even worse. By the evening of the first day of the war, not a single Pe-2 was left here, and all planes of the 16th and 39th Regiments were destroyed on the ground. The Pe-2s were slightly more successful in the south. On the 22nd of June, 6 Pe-2s of the 5th Bomber Regiment, together with 11 SBs, bombed the Danube bridges. A few days later, pilots of the 40th Bomber Regiment of the Black Sea Fleet successfully bombed an oil depot in Ploiesti. In the naval aviation in the second half of 1941, Pe-2s played a prominent role only in the Black Sea Fleet. Partially armed with these planes, in September to December 1941, the 40th Regiment was striking at the German troops rushing towards Sevastopol. As of 1 January 1942, the Black Sea Fleet had 16 P-2s, while the Northern Fleet had only 2, and the Baltic Fleet had 1. Increasing deliveries of Pe-2s allowed in the autumn of 1942 to begin forming Bomber Aviation Corps equipped with such aircraft. As a rule, the Corps included 2 divisions consisting of 3 regiments each. In December 1942, the 1st Air Corps on the Kalinin Front and the 2nd Corps on the Donskoy Front entered the battle. The planes of the 1st back up to the end of January 1943 were striking at the enemy in Velikoliksko and Zhevsko directions. Then the 1st Air Corps acted near Leningrad for about a month, after which it participated in the defeat of the Demian group of the enemy. The 2nd Corps in winter 1942–1943 fought near Stalingrad, and in the spring of 1943 took part in the air battle in the Kuban. At the end of September 1943, the crews of the 1st APC for the first time used the dive bombing from the closed circle, the so-called vertushka, which significantly increased the protection of dive bombers from the attacks of enemy fighters. At the final stage of the war, the dive squadrons provided a breakthrough of the fortified lines of the enemy, striking at the resistance nodes. At the same time, despite the Soviet air supremacy, there were serious losses. On February 11, Corps Commander I. Polban was killed, and his plane was shot down by a direct hit of anti-aircraft missile. The final stage of Soviet Pe-2 warfare was participation in the war against Japan. As of August 9, 1945, in the Far East 555 Pe-2s were accumulated.